lot of good analogies yesterday, making an arsonist your local fire chief. Hours after the president announced the plan for this joint cybersecurity agreement with Russia, he backtracked on it, writing on Twitter, "The fact that President Putin and I discussed a security unit doesn't mean I think it can happen. It can't, but a ceasefire can and did." In today's White House briefing, which again took place in the dark today without cameras and with only audio allowed, Deputy Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders addressed this issue.
This was part of a discussion in that meeting, and look, we recognize that Russia is a cyber threat, but we also recognize the need to have conversations with our adversaries. I'm not sure that there were specific details discussed. I think it was simply just a discussion on cybersecurity threats and potential options, not necessarily a formal kind of structure in place.
With us tonight, White House reporter for Associated Press Jonathan Lemire is back with us, and also returning former Chief of Staff at CIA and DOD, former Chief Counsel for the House Intel Committee, Jeremy Bash. Jeremy, because of your years in the intelligence community, I'll start with you. What was your reaction? Where were you when you heard that, thank goodness, the Russians were willing to work with us on this scourge of cybercrime and electronic security? And what's the damage of even letting that notion float out there all day until it can be corrected?
I was driving. I almost drove off the road, Brian. My analogy is like O.J. Simpson searching for the real killers. And I'm not sure if I'm dating myself with that reference, but I got to say, this really shocked me. Clearly, Vladimir Putin put this forward in the meeting, and our president he bit on it pretty hard, and it shows a fundamental misunderstanding of international relations. We work in concert with certain countries and allies when our interests are aligned, but when they diverge, we work against them. And cybersecurity is one clear case where our interests are diametrically opposed to the Russians. They attacked us. There's nothing really to cooperate with them on in terms of cybersecurity.
We have a quote, Jonathan Lemire, from The Atlantic about the role of a cabinet secretary in this administration. Mnuchin quickly learned, as many other aides have, that the most dangerous task in the Trump administration is defending the last thing the president said, since he's liable to undercut you immediately. Talk about team spirit. It happened to more than one member of the cabinet this weekend.
That's right. For a president who is known to change his mind rather dramatically, this was an about-face that was rather sudden in its how quick it was. It was 12 hours. And it is difficult for his cabinet members, for his press secretary, for his deputy press secretary to get up there, to stand behind a podium and deliver a message that you think is sanctioned by the White House from the boss, and to have it changed, sometimes just half a day later. This is in part of the reason why the White House is having such trouble filling some of those communications roles.
How about the White House briefing? When are we going to be able to maybe see one of these again?
Your guess is as good as ours. I mean, certainly the reporters are agitating for it every single day. It makes no sense. This is the people's house. The taxpayers are funding it. Put them on camera. Let's see them have their messages, put it out there. I mean, I think time and time again, we're particularly seeing on days where it's a bad news cycle. Today, obviously, the Don Jr. story dominating it, where they don't want to have any more attention called to their answers than they need to.
Jeremy Bash, the lawyer and government veteran, what are you struck by in tonight's New York Times story? We've been asking people all night the degree of a game changer that it is.
I think this is highly significant for a couple of reasons, Brian. First, the seniority of the participants in the meeting really stuck out at me, having the campaign chairman, the presidential candidate's son, and his son-in-law. Shows that this was a very high-level meeting, a very high-level discussion. I find it hard to believe that they didn't brief the boss about it. They didn't brief Donald Trump about it. Second is, clearly they knew in advance that it was information coming from the Russian government. Third, the way that Donald Trump Jr. sold the meeting to his colleagues is, hey, we're going to be able to work with this Russian individual, this Russian cutout, on an effort to influence the 2016 presidential election. I mean, isn't this sort of the issue that most people have been searching for and looking for all along. And here we see it tonight spilling forth in the New York Times. I think this provides more than ample fodder for Bob Mueller to follow up upon, either in the grand jury or in front of FBI agents conducting interviews.
And Jonathan, I'm tempted to say I thought it was a meeting about baby adoptions. That is to say, another story has migrated, again, within 24 hours.
That's exactly right. And this is something where this White House, it feels like every time they think they've strung a few good days together. And largely, they were pleased with how last week's trip went. They liked the president's speech in Poland. They think that, you know, he got some stuff done at the G20. Others may disagree, but they were pleased with how he came back. And immediately, it's an avalanche of the same word over and over and over. Russia, Russia, Russia. And he makes a good point that are we to believe that the president had no knowledge of this meeting? I mean, I was on the road with candidate Trump all of last year. That was a day we were in New York. Mr. Trump was here in New York. He attended a fundraiser. He had in the city. He had become the presumptive nominee, but was still in the delegate battle. Are we to believe that he had no knowledge of a meeting that was happening perhaps one floor below his office?
Two of our very best, Jonathan Lemire, Jeremy Bash. Gentlemen, thank you both so much for